Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work as a medical intuitive healer on my two websites, CatherineCarrigan.com and also UnlimitedEnergyNow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Kelle Sparta. Kelle is a transformational shaman. You can find out more about Kelle and her wonderful work at kellesparta.com. She's also the host of the Spirit Sherpa podcast, and you can find out more about her podcast at spiritsherpapodcast.com. Welcome, Kelle Sparta.
Hi, thanks, Catherine. It's great to be here.
So I have to start by asking, what's a transformational shaman? As opposed to a regular shaman.
Yeah,
We don't do any transformation.
Yeah, it's so funny because you ask 100 shamans what it means to be a shaman, they'll give you 100 different answers. That's just sort of the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
But a transformational shaman is someone who is specifically focused on using shamanic techniques to bring about transformation in others.
Okay. Now, we're going to be talking today about getting out of survival mode. Yeah. Which is such a huge, huge topic. When I'm doing medical intuitive readings, one of the things that I look at is actually your brain. And inside of your brain, you've got two amygdalae. There's actually two of them. And if you go above your ears into the brain about 2 inches, you've got two amygdalae. They're the shape of a football. Mm-hmm. And when you are in survival mode, the amygdalae rule, and when information comes into the brain, the amygdalae, plural, send the information to the survival centers of the brain, the reptilian brain, where you're in fight, flight, or freeze. So when I'm doing medical intuitive readings, I look at what are the emotions that's causing somebody to stay stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. So from your perspective, Kelle Sparta, as a transformational shaman, how do you see survival mode?
So that's a great question. The people I work with come from challenged childhoods. And so when I'm looking at survival mode, I'm dealing with sort of institutionalized PTSD and identification level PTSD, as in this is who they believe themselves to be now because this is how they were raised, right? And so their fight or flight or freeze processes are active all the time. I explain to them that it's sort of like they're a warrior who's been on the battlefield for 30 years and has never, they're sleep deprived and everything looks like a threat. And it's easier to shoot first and ask questions later because they're just too tired to figure it out, right? So there's an exhaustion factor involved in it too. And so what I used to explain to people is you've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? At the very bottom is physical survival, food, clothing, shelter. Most of my people, that's not a problem. They're covered there. The next level up is what they call security. And in that level is where this survival mode exists. And so you're looking at emotional security as well as physical security. For most of my people, they've got the physical security covered. And so they think, well, I'm fine. Except that they're not, because the emotional safety, the emotional security is not there. And because they grew up in an environment where they didn't ever have it, they don't really know what it looks like, so they don't know how to create it. And so that's where the challenge comes in, is right in that layer, is being able to get away from constantly being in fear, constant anxiety, constant inner judgment, and inner woe is me, and inner holy shit, what could possibly go wrong, right? Things are just, something's going to blow up. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop even when everything's good, right? That's what emotional survival mode means.
I just really appreciate your perspective on this, Kelle Sparta, and I'll make a couple of observations. I published 8th book, just finished writing my 9th book. And one of my 6 Amazon #1 bestsellers is Unlimited Energy Now. And it's about how to get out of exhaustion. But one of the pieces in order to get your energy back is to get out of survival mode. Because as long as we're in fight, flight, or freeze, we're producing our stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. And these break down everything important. And they're exhausting. It's exhausting. And people feel tired but wired. So as a medical intuitive healer, I'm looking at, are you in fight, are you in flight, or are you in freeze? But part of the important thing that I see about survival mode, you may be a highly educated person, you may consider yourself a very spiritual person. But when you are in survival mode, when you're operating out of survival mode, the energy in your brain goes to the back of your brain and you're simply operating on old programming.
Yeah.
And when we're in our old programming, this is the imprints that you received as a child. I'm bad. Nobody likes me. There's not enough for me. All the other stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, when you internalize that, it results in things like not having a good sense of self-preservation. So I literally did an interview on my podcast yesterday with one of my students, and she had done a manifestation. We were talking about law of attraction, and she had done a manifestation where she wanted to have a car accident that totaled her car, but where nobody got seriously hurt, right? And she did. She managed to get rear-ended by someone, but she came out with whiplash and something else, which were minor things, but they were still injuries. And I'm like, did it not occur to you to say where no one gets injured at all? and she was like, well, no, it just logically, it felt like if my car was totaled, somebody would get injured. And I'm like, did it not occur to you that perhaps there was another way to bring this in? And no, it didn't. And that's exactly what happens, right? Is that we get this sense of not knowing how to take care of ourselves, not knowing what behavior is risky, not recognizing that it's a reckless behavior, right? And that's part of the imprint that we get, that you're talking about, that childhood imprint. So it's the lack of self-preservation, the inability to feel and receive joy, the feeling of unworthiness all the time, of having love or success or anything good and happy in your life. These are childhood imprints that are a function of this survival mode process.
Right. And we can be triggered all the time in our regular life because we've got these beliefs that are imprinted in us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Triggered constantly.
Triggered constantly.
Yeah.
So, when I'm doing my medical intuitive readings, I look at what are the beliefs that you got instilled in you before you were 5, because before we're 5, we're highly programmable.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, the young baby decides, nobody likes me. But a lot of times these beliefs come from your mother or your father.
Yeah.
Like it's hard you can't make money as a woman, or you have to struggle to survive, or that life is difficult.
Yeah.
I'm saying the largest cult in the world is difficult. So when you look at these beliefs that have been running you, it's kind of like your operating system on a mental, emotional, spiritual level. These are the beliefs that are keeping you in the survival mode. And on a physiological level, it keeps your nervous system stuck in that sympathetic mode, again, where you're constantly pouring out the stress hormones, which break down every cell in your body and age you really fast and cause all kinds of health problems.
Yeah.
Now, from your perspective, Kelle Sparta, as a transformational shaman, how do you see, why do you think someone would be in survival mode?
So it's very interesting because I tell people, I'm like, I work with people who come from challenged childhoods, and inevitably what they say to me is, well, it wasn't so bad. And that could be anybody who maybe they had a physically or sexually abusive background, and they go, well, it wasn't so bad. Other people have it worse. Or they have an emotionally abusive background, which is actually harder for people to recognize, because at least the physical abuse leaves scars. You can say, oh, look, I have a bruise, and so therefore I got hurt. Emotional abuse, especially gaslighting, where you have a parent who says, what is your problem? You don't have the right to be unhappy. There's nothing wrong with you. Stop being unhappy. That sort of abuse, where your feelings were not seen, validated, heard, in any way acknowledged, that's actually almost worse than having had physical abuse, because you don't have anything to prove that it happened. And in fact, you're being actively told it didn't. And so that creates a sense of doubt in your inner self. And so inevitably, what I tell people is, if your needs did not get met in childhood, your need for love, your need for affection, your need for validation, your need for a sense of belonging, your need for food, clothing, shelter, any of these things, safety, if those needs did not get met, then you come from a challenged childhood. And this is what creates these responses in the system.
Yes, and I agree with you that a lot of this negative imprinting occurs in childhood, but at the same time, there's things that happen. I just did a medical intuitive reading just yesterday on a woman who'd actually been raped, not once, but twice. And of course, we have our veterans who are in the war.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we go through these very challenging events as human beings, and our spirits are strong and we can survive. But again, if you don't unwind this deep negative imprinting, then, like when I did the medical intuitive reading on the lady who'd been raped twice, I said, this imprint of being a victim and abuse is all the way deep, all the way down to your cellular level. And you've got to unwind that. And unwinding the imprinting on all the levels and the mental, emotional, spiritual patterns, I feel is essential if we want to get our energy back.
Absolutely. That's actually what I do. So I help people through that process, because a lot of my people have a very hard time working in therapy, because in therapy, the challenge with therapy is that, for one, it only works with you until you're functional. That's part of our insurance system, is they only want to pay to get you functional. And, most of my people are fairly functional people. They're just not happy. They're just stressed out and anxious all the time, but they're functional because they learned how to be functional in a dysfunctional environment. So that's issue number one. But issue number two is that the vast majority of talk therapy is, let me lead you to the right answer and have you find it yourself by the Socratic method of asking a bunch of questions. And my people find that very frustrating, because they don't know where the person is going, because their perspective is skewed. It's like they spent their entire life with someone standing on their face on the ground. And at some point, they just realized that this is how you see the world. And so that at some point they decided they needed to move through the world. So they put a skateboard under their face. And now they're walking along on hands and feet with a skateboard, with their face on a skateboard, hoping nobody kicks them in the head or steps on their hands. And that happens all the time, because nobody sees them because they're on the skateboard, right? And so the whole point is that the perspective is so skewed from the environment that you really have to right the perspective. And the only way to do that is to say, okay, this perspective, not so good. Look at it this way, right? And to really just help the person bring their perspective back into focus, and to be able to see it that way. When you're talking about people with later life issues, the rape, the combat, and I've worked with veterans. So that is about, in shamanic terms, we have a process called a soul retrieval. And anytime you have a traumatic event, a piece of your spirit stays in the event in order to hold that experience for you until you can process it. And so part of the work is in preparing yourself to be able to process it. And a lot of times that takes some work, because you've got to really have a solid sense of self to be able to hold the energy to deal with the trauma, right? And so once you've solidified your sense of self, then you can pull that piece of your spirit back to bring that experience home and be able to process it. The goal of it, and this is one of the things that I talk to rape survivors about all the time, is that they really encourage you in the rape community to go from victim to survivor. And I'm like, yeah, but don't stay in survivor for long, because then you identify with survivor and then you draw to you more experiences to survive. So don't stay in survivor. You want to get to the point where you pull enough of the energy out of the trauma to be able to make it just another experience in your life. And so that it no longer defines you. You don't want to be defined by your trauma. That's not the way to live.
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you. And, Kelle, Sparta, here at the Natural Healing Show, we have great respect, first of all, for all people who are seeking to move forward in their lives. And there's many, as you know, there's many, many helpful natural healing techniques. I know that when I'm working with a person to get out of PTSD, I basically go backwards from whatever age they are now. Let's say you're 60, and I go backward in time and I identify every year or time when there was an event that happened that triggered you to go into survival mode. I find the age, I find the emotion, all the belief patterns, and also the archetypes that got activated at that time. And when we get all the information, all the ages, all the emotions, all the beliefs, everything that causes you to stay in survival mode, and then I'll do a healing where I ask at the soul level, what do you need to do to release this? And the way I like to explain soul retrieval, because I have my own methods of doing that, and the way I like to explain it is, let's say you're a car, like you say you're an old Chevrolet, and you're driving down the road, and then you had a little bump, and you lost a hubcap. And then you keep driving, then you lost a windshield wiper. And then you keep driving, and you lost something else. And so as people, it's very common through our traumas that we do lose key aspects of ourselves. But we also, rather than beating up on yourself if this has in fact occurred, you have to realize that at the soul level, I feel that you are extremely wise and your soul is guiding your healing process. And many times, we don't have the personal resources in order to recover from a traumatic event. And sometimes you have to gather the resources around you, whether it's a healer who has the tools to root it all out, or maybe you have to build your personal energy up in order to, have the energy to heal. Healing is a very energy intensive process. So I believe that it's a good idea to respect all healing traditions, to respect everyone who's moving forward. Because it's a law of physics that an object in motion stays in motion unless acted upon by a force equal to or larger than itself. So you want to start moving forward, say a prayer, ask that you be led to the people and resources that will help you clear and help you to heal these traumas at a pace that your psyche and your soul can actually handle.
Yeah, I can't agree more with that. That's so true. And there are a million different paths to healing. So, if one path to healing doesn't work for you, find another one, because there is a path to healing for you, regardless of whether one thing worked or it didn't. As I said, most of my people went to therapy first, and that didn't work for them. But then they come here and they make, explosive progress. And I take a very different approach to it. I actually don't go backwards in time unless it's a very specific singular trauma. Because most of what I deal with is sort of systemic across a long period of time. It's not possible to really look at individual things because it was more, environmental. So I tend to just work where we are and go forward. And what I do is work on solidifying the result of systemic PTSD is that the sense of self is degraded. And so it's like you have this identity that is a container in which you live. And for most of my people, the identity container is ripped or poked with holes or, cracked in many places. And in some cases, even shattered, where they've just gone into learned helplessness and they don't even know what to do. And they just wait for other people to tell them what to do. And so what I do is work on re-solidifying that sense of identity and putting that back together in the current moment so that they can feel solid and strong, so that they feel like they have a right to claim a space in the world that is theirs, to set boundaries, to have their own power and not have to ask people for permission or validation. That's the work that I work on, and I work from here and move forward. So, and again, it's about where it comes from, right?
Yeah. And, I appreciate how you described it. One way to think of this is, people who've gone through a lot of PTSD have sort of a Swiss cheese ego.
Yeah, exactly.
And you may feel like you're okay at work, but then you go with your family and it's like all of a sudden you're an 8-year-old all over again, and all your emotions come up and you go into the old archetypes that caused you to suffer.
Yeah.
So it's all about moving forward. So I'm releasing the past in order to move forward.
Yeah.
So yeah. So again, I agree with you that when people have gone through these traumas and lost different aspects of yourself, often important aspects of yourself, in order to survive, you don't even know who you are anymore.
Yeah. And they don't know who they are. They don't know what they want. They don't know where they fit in the world. There's often social anxiety that comes with that because they don't know how to be in group environments. There's a lot of pieces and parts that go to it. And then you end up with all kinds of coping mechanisms that come into play where, maybe they get into drugs or alcohol or, overindulge in sex or food or TV or, whatever their coping mechanism is to try and just take a break from the insanity of thoughts running through their brain that is constantly assaulting them, right?
Yes. And I agree that the addictive patterns are a symptom of, soul loss, shall we say, right?
Absolutely.
One of the funniest things my mother ever said to me, I'll never forget, my mother said, I think childhood is a highly overrated experience. And, it was such a funny remark because one way to think of your childhood, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, it's about how you got imprinted, how you learned about the world, what programs were set up in your psyche that you're operating from.
Yeah.
So as a transformational shaman, Kelle Sparta, what do you mean when you say challenge childhood? Because that could be any of us. You're alive on the planet. You probably had a few challenges along the way.
Yeah, well, and I kind of mentioned that before in the fact that it's where your needs didn't get met, right? It's why it is that you're feeling not solid or not safe in yourself. If you on a regular basis do not feel solid or safe in yourself, you probably had a challenged childhood, because people who came up in secure, loving homes don't have those emotions. So if you have a constant barrage of thoughts running through your head that are criticizing and judging you, then you had a challenged childhood, I promise you. If you are not comfortable in new environments and you don't know how to be in the world, then you had a challenged childhood in some way. Now, Catherine, I have a question for you, because I've been working with a client who has Panda. Are you familiar with Panda? Yeah. So I've come up with a theory, and we're working on the theory, but Panda doesn't really have a cure from a medical perspective. But it is, from my perspective, what it feels like energetically, and I'd like to get your take on this. We didn't talk about this beforehand, so this is going to be fun. I'd like to get your take on it, but my take on it is that that they had an infection or an illness that was traumatic to the body, and that the body perceived it as trauma. And that therefore now all of these emotional patterns are being changed because of the body's response to a trauma. And because it's presenting very much like the trauma that I see emotionally and from experiential processes. It just is coming from the medical side of having been an illness. What's your take on it?
Okay. So first of all, what Kelle Sparta is talking about is people who are pretty much universal reactors. So the simple way to put it is allergic to life, okay? And it is certainly true that as healers, we can go around working on the different illnesses, working on the parasites, working on the H. pylori, working on Epstein-Barr virus. And I certainly clear all of those and more. But you have to look at it from a global perspective. And Albert Einstein said, the most important question is whether or not you consider the universe to be a friendly place.
Right.
So if I've got somebody, first of all, if I've got somebody, they've been, they're chronically ill, and these are my people. These are the people that I work with. They've been everywhere, seen 30 different people, can't get well. Those are the people, who often end up working with me and get completely well, soup to nuts. So there's a lot of things that I'm going to do with them. The first thing I'm going to do is a healing with them to be willing to get better. And there's 25 different payoffs that you can get by staying sick. Like, for example, you talked about the client who manifested a car wreck. That's not unusual. So in 2 of my books, The Difference Between Pain and Suffering and also What is Healing, I talk about the different payoffs that people get by staying sick, fat, and unhealthy. So if you've been unwell for a long time, I encourage you to inquire into yourself, what payoffs am I get? What secondary gains am I get by staying unwell? Because if you don't clear the willingness to heal, then, you can fix the Epstein-Barr and then they break their ankle. And then you fix the Epstein-Barr and the ankle and then they get a head injury. And it's just on and on and on. Versus going to the root issues and then, creating a whole new ecosystem of health. So first thing I'm going to look at is this person willing to get well? And where are the blocks? Physical, energetic, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Are they having payoffs for staying sick? And then I'm going to do a healing to clear that up. And the second thing, and this is more global, and this is exactly what we're talking about, is I will, and sometimes it's, what do you do first? I'll do a healing with that person on the universe is a friendly place to me. Because if you have a core belief that the universe is a friendly place to me, then this goes back to the feeling of safety and security that you're talking about. But also when you believe and know and experience that the universe is a friendly place to you, then everything that happens is for your highest good. You have a traumatic childhood and you meet somebody like Kelle Sparta who helps you do the inner work, so you become this strong, powerful person. You have a car wreck and then you meet the love of your life in the hospital. So, it's really important that while, we can get lost in the weeds of all these different illnesses and, am I allergic to wheat, or is it the pollen outside, or all of the above? Looking at that global question of, is the universe a friendly place to me? And then doing a deep healing so that is the belief, that's your operating system. And, then everyone and everything at a soul level is your friend. And I've worked with lots of people who are abused. I remember one lady, she grew up and her father was always hitting her. And she would recall standing between her father and her younger siblings and taking the punches so that her siblings didn't get hit. And, you know, a lot of times what I find as a medical intuitive, on one level, it's sort of ain't it awful? Oh my God, you had this abusive father. My own father, my first memory of my life was my father beating my mother with a belt buckle and my mother covering me with her body so I didn't get hit. You know, I can say, well, that's why I became a healer, right? So you look at what, again, clearing out at a really deep level so that you're operating at a totally different, different level. That's my advice on dealing with somebody with Panda, right? Looking at those two things first, okay? Yeah. Being willing to get well, and do they believe and hold and operate from the universe as a friendly place to me? And yeah. Then, so on the soul level, a lot of these people who are the bad guys in our life, on a soul level, they're our best friends. It's yeah. Like, I'm going to beat you up so that you become strong. Or I'm going to do so many awful things that you really, truly learn forgiveness. You don't just learn about it or read it in a spiritual book. You get it at a deep level.
Right.
So again, sometimes when you flip it around on a spiritual level, these ogres, again, are here to help us. Yeah. But you're not going to be able to really get that lesson and own it and incorporate it and integrate it as long as you see yourself as a victim of the world.
Right.
And life.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with my father. My father was not physically abusive, but was certainly not emotionally kind. And when he passed over a couple of years ago, I actually saw him come to me as a member of my soul family in his full-blown loving self, and I was just like, yeah, thanks, Dad. Yeah, because he was a driving force for my evolution my whole life, you know. And he didn't pass until he passed like a year after I got my final aha from him. So it was like, yep, mission complete, I'm on my way, right? And so yeah, it's exactly like that.
Yes. Now, going back to survival mode, Kelle Sparta, as a transformational shaman, why do you feel it's so hard for people to get out of survival mode?
Well, so part of it is that you're constantly under attack. And you know, it's either a perceived attack from the outside world or an inner attack. And the fact of the matter is that 20% of stress in life is what happens to us, and 80% is what we make it mean in our heads. And because there's this tendency to take everything as an attack, because you're like that exhausted soldier on the battlefield where everything that comes at you could be an attack, so just shoot now and assume it is, right? The assumption at a basic core level is that everything is dangerous and everything is a challenge. And when you're in that survival state, you're under so much stress. They've actually scientifically proven that you lose 10 points of IQ when you're under stress. And so we're literally stupider than we usually are and than we should be, because we're in this state of constant stress. And so no matter how hard you work at it, you're always fighting against this inner battle that's going on, and you're trying to overcome it. And that's why it's so hard. And on top of it, the coping mechanisms that we put in place in our childhood serve to create this outer shell of protection for us, right? So it's like this tapestry of coping mechanisms that we wove together all at once in our childhood. And when you go to a class or something, or you go to a healer, in a lot of cases, they're going to pull on a single thread. You know, we're going to deal with one issue, and it's a tapestry. And if you pull on one issue, it's going to snag on the others. And so it's not really going to get very far. And what you actually have to do is unravel the entire thing, because over the course of your childhood, that tapestry that was your protection, as you get older, becomes this sort of straitjacket that tightens up around you. And if you feel into your body, you can sort of feel your entire body pushing against it, because you can feel that there's something there that you're pushing against. There's this constant stress that you're pushing against as you're doing it. And so because it's hard to move one thing at a time, because you're constantly under attack and internally, this is what makes it so hard to move it.
Yeah. And, I love the way you describe it, because this really is global. I mean, this is the root cause of autoimmune disease, for example. You've literally internalized the attack, right?
Right. Yep.
And so, I love the Course in Miracles. It's a spiritual book. It's non-denominational, and it talks about your attack thoughts. And again, a lot of times, one of the wisest things I've ever read about abuse is when the abuser is no longer there to abuse that person, to hit them or call them names. A lot of times the person who's been imprinted with abuse, they abuse themselves, whether it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, overwork, overexercise, all the alcohol, all the different ways that we can abuse ourselves. Now, Kelle, Sparta, I know that you have a 5-step process to help people get out of survival mode. Can you give our audience an overview about how you go through these 5 steps to get people out of survival mode?
Yeah. So, the first one is to get off the skateboard, right? Because you've got to change your perspective, right? You've got to get your perspective right so that you stop perceiving everything as a problem. And the second thing is to get out of the straitjacket, to unravel that straitjacket, right? We've already sort of talked about those a little bit. The third one is really to understand the process of change itself, because what we do, this process of unwinding and evolving, it becomes sort of we begin to identify with it. When you have this global of an issue, then it's become part of your identity. And so the process of unwinding and changing it becomes an ongoing thing that we do. And so understanding how the process of change works, understanding what to expect in the process of change so that you don't flip out and quit just before you're going to make progress, which happens to a lot of people. I see that happen a lot in people in spiritual processes. They'll come in, they'll stay in just long enough until they get challenged, and then they'll declare themselves cured, and they'll bounce to another one and start the whole process over again because their ego is fighting against the shift. So understanding your resistances to change, understanding how the change itself works, all of that. That's step 3. Step 4 is about learning how to accept help and get support along the way. And step 5 is learning to not live on leftovers. I tell people that you're living on leftovers. You're living on leftover time, you're living on leftover energy, you're living on leftover money. Everything and everyone else comes first, and you come last. We are literally sacrificing ourselves on the altar of other people's happiness. And so you have to learn not to live on the leftovers that are in your life. You need to feed yourself first. The old oxygen mask metaphor is good for this, but it's at a deeper level than that, though. It's not just in a survival space. This is your life, and no one is going to look at you and say that you are more important than you, right? And when you treat yourself as the least important person in your own life, you are literally robbing yourself of your life. And so this is why it's so important to stop doing that, to stop living on leftovers.
Yeah, I just love the way you describe that, living on leftovers. It's such a really important message, right?
Yeah.
And to me, this goes back to our relationship with ourselves. And you said something that I really agree with earlier, which is to not identify with yourselves as a survivor. Now, for many people, a survivor, that's a positive, right? It's like, hey, I overcame this really challenging thing. But anytime you're playing a role, right, you're not being your true self,
Right.
At a soul level, you're here to be you. You're here to offer your unique vibration to the world. The world needs your vibration. How do I know that? Because you're here. There's
Right.
nobody exactly like you. The world needs your unique vibration. You're already a VIP. You're already a vibrational interference pattern. And there's something about you that your soul really wants to contribute. And only you can do that. And when we get hung up in these other roles, even if it seems positive, like survivor, then you're not really being your true self.
Right.
Right? So the more that we can drop the labels, drop these facades, the better off we are. And again, I agree with you about not living on leftovers. And when you come to value your true self and really comprehend that your true self has a unique soul mission, and you embrace that, even if you don't quite know what it is, and if you don't know who you are yet, if you just take my word for it and Kelly's word for it, that you're a VIP already and that you're worth taking care of, then you begin to have a healthy relationship with yourself. And when we've been abused, a lot of times that affects our relationship with ourselves and therefore all the other relationships in our lives. And there's so many, one of the things that I do when I'm doing a medical intuitive reading is I look at what is your relationship with yourself. And some of the primary dramas are poor me, which is victim. Okay. Right. Easy, especially if you've been abused, it's easy to go into poor me. Mm-hmm. Interrogator, which is kind of like smart aleck. Where were you on the night of, Friday the 13th? Why aren't you over this yet? You went to therapy once. Why aren't you over it? Intimidator, which is like bully, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really internalizing the abuse. So you keep abusing yourself. And another big one is aloof, where you're ungrounded. You're not present for yourself. You're not your own best friend.
Right.
So as we do the inner work, we can heal our relationship with ourselves and come back into full awareness and a remembering why your soul is here.
Yeah.
Right?
That's actually one of the things that I get all the time from people is, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? And, because I do energy scans and I read people's energy fields, but I'm reading the emotional context rather than the physical. And, people are like, oh, what's my mission? And I'm like, look, okay, here's the deal. You have to stop looking outside of yourself for your purpose and your mission, because your mission and your purpose on the planet is to be the fullest expression of who you are. That's it. So if you don't know what your purpose and mission are, because you don't know yourself, then get to know yourself better, because just being you is what is meant to bring you in, is what you're meant to bring into the world.
I just really love what you're saying, that, if you could summarize how you find out what your soul mission is, it's to be you.
Right.
And if anybody has been to my website, you know that I'm a raving fan of orchids. I raise orchids. And I remember in 2009, I went to Scotland to visit a friend of mine who makes healing remedies from orchids. And I remember before I went, I had what I joked as low orchid self-esteem. I thought, maybe his orchids are going to be more beautiful than my orchids. And it was such a lesson. It's like, we're all beautiful, we're all beautiful. We're all powerful, and as you reclaim these lost parts of yourself, you can become more and more you. Yeah. And offer more and more of your own unique vibration to the world. And yes. in so doing, then you discover your beauty and you express more of your soul purpose.
Right. And I can hear people thinking this, so I'm going to say it. Just because somebody else has done it doesn't mean that it's not valid for you to do it. And, the way that you're going to do it is going to be different than everybody else. And the people that you're going to speak to are going to be different than everybody else. And if you don't do it because someone else did it, then there's a whole swath of people who are not going to be able to receive the information because it didn't come from you.
Right. It's the way that you say it and the way that you do it. So Kelle Sparta, transformational shaman, any final thoughts for our audience?
Be kind to yourself. The one thing that I see in my students all the time is this hardcore goal setting, constant abuse of why am I not there yesterday, right? And the fact is that if you want to make progress on this, you have to give up the goal of making progress and just be with what is and be with yourself and allow yourself to be who you are, because that's the foundation of the work. So be kind to yourself, say nice things to yourself, remind yourself that the world is a happy and friendly place that's looking out for you. Remind yourself that you are exactly where you're meant to be and you're not supposed to be further along. You are where you're supposed to be, and just be present in that moment and you will find it is much easier than trying to get somewhere.
Wonderful advice. You've been listening to Kelle Sparta, transformational shaman. You can find out more about Kelle and her wonderful work at kellesparta.com. And while you're there, also listen to her podcast, Spirit Sherpa Podcast, which you can find at spiritsherpapodcast.com. This is Catherine Carrigan. I'm your host for the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, medical intuitive healer, and Amazon #1 bestselling author. Visit my websites, catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. And while you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. And remember, when you practice kindness to yourself and reintegrate aspects that you've lost, you become more and more of your true self and express who you really are. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.